Hi, for this week, I want to talk with you guys a little bit about core values and conflict. Thanks for joining me. This is pretty key, of course, to interpersonal communication. I mean, it's right there in the title. You guys have, if you've thought about this, but personal is right there in the title of this class, right? Which means we are going to get into personal stuff, really personal stuff. How people get along is really core to this class, right? And people often wonder why we talk so much about conflict in the class, like interpersonal communication. And that's because learning how and why we get along with people we love and already like, we're going to talk about that, that's interesting. But that's not quite as helpful or as useful as in this class. We need to learn how to get along with people we don't exactly get along with, right? So there it is. There it is. And it's also important to mention that in interviews, over half, according to some studies, 60% of interview questions when you're trying to get a job are interpersonal in nature. So this class is really going to help you get a job too. So I like that. And I wanted to share that right away in the beginning. Um, People have one thing in common, and that is that they're different. I like this quote a lot. Um, we often spend a lot of our time trying to figure out how we're similar to each other. And then we're going to base us getting along on that, right? But the truth is, we're all different. We're all very, very different from each other. And getting along is going to be more complicated than simply looking for people who are clones of us, right? Like when we're kids, we grow up in a family, and our families are pretty similar. Like we have a lot of similar values, we have similar backgrounds, even have similar genetics. But when we get into life and into the world, we need to learn how to get along with people who are different. That's just how it is. And that's what this class is really going to cover. So this lecture right now is going to cover these three things. Understanding communication conflict. We're going to talk about your communication tool bag. That's just a way to visualize how you react when things happen. And then we're going to talk about the power of habits today. Yeah, so there we go. Let's get into it. So first off, understanding communication conflict, right? So when we get into fights, conflict of any kind, the whole point is, one point of this class is to try and slow down how those conflicts happen. They happen at different speeds, right? We have slow conversation conflict, and these are pretty easy to deal with. These are like fights with our friends, people who like little disagreements. But we all know that that velocity can get up and get up fast. In this class, we're going to cover those 60-mile-an-hour conversations, but we're going to get more than that. We're going to go all the way up. We're going to talk about the really, really tough fights. So today is the beginning of that. So we're not going to jump into this depth today, but I wanted to make sure you understand where we're going. It's important. It's really important for you to understand how to get along with people, not just in your family and friends, but for work, to get along in this world. This country, America, is of course super diverse, which is a really nice strength of ours, but it does mean conflict. Conflict is going to happen here even more than countries where things are really homogenous, right? So let's jump into why we react. So this little graphic here kind of shows how we react when something gets through one of these outside barriers to our emotions, right? So these four are the triggers, the different paths that people can get to our emotions I want to talk about. So let's talk about the first one, values and beliefs. So this is what you think is true, what you think is real. Your beliefs these could be like for me, my values, I know that I value relationship, I value friendship, and I also value fair play. That's a big one for me, which is part of why in this class you're going to see, like, I don't accept work that's more than 2 days late. That's, I think, shared with several professors here at this school, actually. A lot of us value fairness. I tend to look at school, I tend to look at my entire life as a bit of a game. And in viewing it that way, you can understand why I value fairness so much. It's the only way to make the game enjoyable and to make it so that we can all achieve. So in this class, when I say, oh, I don't want to accept late work that's more than 2 days late, unless you have a really good reason, that's why. I just want it to be fair for everybody, right? So that's one of my values. I also value play a lot. I really want to make sure that that my life reflects that. And if I don't, I start to feel that discordant feeling in my life that I'm not living up to what I truly value. There's also beliefs in there because those go together. Beliefs are things that you believe are true based on faith. So that could be beliefs as far as like religious beliefs, but it could also be beliefs just about the world. We all have lots of beliefs about people, about the nature of people, about why people act the way they do, all of that. So that's one direction to get to your emotions. So right now is a good spot to take a pause, this video, and to write down some thoughts about your beliefs and your values, because that's part of your homework for this week. You don't have to, but I'm going to have several of these breakout moments where I'm going to suggest that you pause this video to do your homework. And if you do, you'll probably be done with it, or very close to done, at least half done, when we get to the end of this video. So anyway, there's my breakout for this. The next thing I want to talk about is life experiences. So understanding why we react. Life experiences, when those are shared, so that's when what's happening to you now is similar to other people's life experiences and to other life experiences that you've had, right? So like, what's a good example for this one? You are in college right now. Maybe you're in that school, right? College is school. So your past experiences in school are definitely impacting your reaction to this class. If you haven't thought about that. If you've had bad schooling experiences, if you've had teachers who've been strict before, if you've had a class where a teacher was mean to you, then you will show up in this class with all of that loaded, ready to go, ready to get to your emotions. And that's something, of course, I won't know anything about. Neither will your classmates, right? But that's part of life, is those life experiences before what happened now are part of why we react. And that's a negative example, but it could also be positive, right? We could have a positive life experience. Maybe you have you don't own a dog, but you go to your friend's house and they have one, and it is a yellow lab, and that lab jumps up on you and licks your face, and you love it. Well, that will change how you expect to experience dogs in the future. Are all dogs that way? Of course not. Of course not. But you'll kind of expect that, right? That's part of how we react. So again, this is the place where you would write out some notes for your homework. So similar experiences is different from life experiences, and they're a bit more, I believe, more general in nature. So a good way to think about this is like, say for example, you have had maybe you have a math class where you had a really mean teacher who really made you hate math. Now, if you have to take math again in college, you'll probably be ready to hate it. You'll probably have a bad experience. Your emotions will be raw and ready to get to. So that's another way to think about this. Perhaps how similar experiences work. Now take a minute to go ahead and write down your thoughts about that for your homework. So I want to take a minute here to talk about what triggers you when you react negatively to communication, right? It could be a lot of things. What ones of these stand out to you? And I want you to reflect on this. So does being talked down to you trigger you, right? That could be from past experiences. That would be from past experiences. How about questioning your honesty? Does that trigger you? How about a lack of confidence, when somebody clearly has a lack of confidence, or being interrupted? That one bothers me so much. Or about silence, when somebody gives you no feedback at all, or just flat out aggression, right? All of those probably trigger a negative reaction in you. A good chance of it, but maybe not all of them. And that has to do with your past experiences. That's why those things are that way. Now, the fourth one on here is previous communications. So as opposed to experiences, communications, just literally how you've communicated in the past will impact your reaction now and how your emotions react. So let's look at a communications loop. So first thing you have is your trigger or your cue, whatever it is that happens to trigger your emotions, right? It could be any one of those things in that list from the last page. Any one of those, right? Maybe somebody interrupts you in a conversation, or somebody's giving you the cold shoulder, or is just aggressive towards you. So that happens. The first thing, we go through the loop, your emotions are triggered, right? So that makes sense. Your emotions happen. Usually these two things happen really fast. In fact, this whole loop happens really fast. And then the next thing that happens after your emotions are triggered is you reach for the tools in your reaction toolkit. Visually, you can see there's weapons there, because that is how a lot of us react. But things like silence, all of that, those are reactions we can choose from in order to emotionally react. I say choose from as if we go rifling through our little bag and pick what we're going to do, which is in theory what we do. We're going to talk about in this class how to do that more intentionally. But it is, as you know, it's tricky stuff. And then everything loops back again to the trigger, and it all goes again in a loop. So this is how communication works generally. This is one way to visualize it. There's a lot of ways to visualize communication that we're going to talk about in this class. But this is one way to understand how your emotions are triggered, how this works. So let's go into it a little more depth in a second, but let's talk about some of these emotional states we can be in. So one is when we just have a weak filter and we're triggered very, very easily, right? So we could talk about, I'm sure you can think of negative examples of this. When you're tired, when you're stressed, a lot of pressure on you, we tend to have a very weak filter. And so it's very difficult to not be triggered, right? But let's think of some positives, because those are negative examples. Some positive examples of this would be, say, imagine you are really excited about being in college, right? Maybe you love the fact that you're in college right now. And maybe you're new to it, especially. And when you go home, your family, your friends, anybody's like, "Hey, how's school?" And you're like, emotions. You're like, "I love it. This is so. I'm having a lot of fun." Maybe that's being triggered as well. It's similar. It's not the same type of thing. It's not, of course, in a negative emotion, but you're still being triggered. So I think that's important to mention. This can happen both ways. We're used to it happening negatively, but when we have our emotions get triggered, they get triggered. There's another emotional state that's important to mention, and that's when we're on lockdown. That's when our emotions are just not getting moved at all. This can happen for a couple of reasons. One could be we just don't care about what's happening. We don't care about the situation. But more often than not, it has to do with past trauma. It has to do with what's happened to us in the past. That can cause us to lock our emotions down. So maybe you've been through something, and then it just feels like when those issues come back up, you just lock down. So those are two different options, really, is to be reactive and to lock down, but both aren't healthy. So let's talk about some of the tools that we have in our tool bag to react when this kind of stuff happens. There's a lot. So right now, what can you think of? How do you react when stuff like this happens to you? When people get right through your filters? Um, so let's think about positive ones. So some positive ones would be active listening. These are things that tools you use to connect with other people. Compliments, maybe you compliment people a lot. Eye contact, that's of course a very super important one. There's positive feedback. Hey, I love how you did that. Thank you for getting a coffee for me. I love how you like your hair. I like your outfit. Those are all positive feedback. Just simply smiling is a positive tool to use to connect with others. And then I say physical touch here, that might stand out as weird, but what I mean is if your culture is comfortable with it, things like, anything, a hug, patting on the back. I know in some cultures, what is that? Where was I? I was in somewhere in the Dominican Republic, and I just noticed people hold hands and walk. Friends hold hands and walk a lot. Kind of cool. Not something we do here in America, but physical touch is a key element of communication. So what about you? What do you use to connect with others? This would be a good spot to pause and write down what you have, because it's going to matter for your homework. But there's also what kind of tools do you reach for when you're in the red zone, when things are going bad, right? When you've been triggered. What there are tools that you reach for. It might be strange to think of it that way. Like, am I reaching for tools? You are. You are. And these are tools that you've learned to use over time because they've worked for you, right? So let's look at them. Here's some examples. Do you lash out? I know I do. What about silence, though? Two opposite ends of that spectrum. Maybe you just get quiet. Maybe you give whoever you're dealing with the silent treatment. You avoid them. Do you detach? Do you use sarcasm? Sarcasm is a popular one, and it looks like you're facing the issue, but really, those cutting remarks don't usually help. Or do you apologize? Maybe you jump straight to just taking it all on yourself and apologizing. None of these are especially the best. So let's think about this, though. I want you to think about what tools do you reach for? So this is part of your reflection. If this was in class, this would be done in class, but you have this as part of your reflection for your homework. So I say here, list one positive and one negative communication tool that you have in your tool bag. So when you're thinking about this, it might be helpful when you're like, okay, how do I think of what I do? For the positive ones, think of friends. Friends are probably people who you use positive tools with. And then for negative, think of that one person who drives you crazy. And what are some reactions you have to them? For me, it's my brother. I go straight to him, and I think about how I react to him because I've habitually learned how to react to that guy. So what about you? And then for the next part, it says next to each tool, I want you to write down where you think you got that tool from. So you're going to have to be thinking about this for your homework. But we get our tools from somewhere. We get them from parents, life experiences, maybe from school, but we get all of these from somewhere. Yeah, where'd you get yours? So let's look at this. I have a good model here to walk through how this can look. So I have a model here. We're going to look at how all of this works. I have a family member and you. So go ahead and pick a family member that maybe you've had conflict with to imagine for this. That'll help you understand this visual better. And I have under here that they're under pressure and you're overworked, because that's how it always is, right? It's never that you're doing great and then you have conflict, because you have the tools to deal with it, right? You can reach for the right tools, the positive tools. But when you're overworked, it's a bit more habitual. What tools you reach for are a bit more habitual, right? You reach for what's worked in the past, what you've done in the past, even if it hasn't worked. If you've survived using that tool, then you'll reach for it again. So let's look at this example. So you have your family member, they're under pressure, and you have you, and you're overworked, and you're hanging out together. You're just hanging out. Well, that doesn't seem like a recipe for disaster, except that there's this concept called seepage. It's kind of a gross sounding word, but seepage is real, and that's the way that your emotions, like this person being under pressure, their emotions are seeping through them. It comes out. It comes out in looks. It comes out in what they say. It comes out in tone. It might come out in literally the words they're saying. But you are very good at interpreting all of this, right? So all of this stuff, maybe they're short-tempered, maybe they say things that are clipped, maybe they're just obviously irritated, and you can see all of it because you're an expert at interpreting your family member. You are. You've been doing it your whole life, so you're really good at it. So you're seeing all of this, but you don't see it for what it really is. You see it through a filter, because none of us actually interact with each other without there being a lot in the way, right? We're like seeing each other through a lot. So you have a filter that you have up, and that helps you deal with what they're saying. And there's a lot to talk about with this filter, right? There's the biological aspects of it, like you are actually seeing and hearing and using biological means to interpret a social experience. But there's also your internal filters that you have up, which is your entire life experience up till now. That's all. So you have your filter up, right? So then you, seeing all this seepage, you seeing them short-tempered, seeing them talk to you all clipped, they're obviously irritated, you have your emotional reaction. If your emotional reaction, you reach towards your toolkit and you grab a tool. For this example, I choose silence. Or in this example, we choose silence. The family member's being terrible. We are not in a bad mood. We're doing great, but we're overworked, and we know that we might rip their head off if we try and hang out with them much longer. So we just choose to be quiet and be silent. That is an entire interaction, and that kind of makes sense, right? You could see this happening. You could see this happening in your life. You've probably experienced this. Maybe you didn't choose silence. Maybe you chose something else, but something worked, and if it did work and you survived the entire situation, then your brain says, ooh, good one. Let's put that into the habitual spot of the brain. And now this will be what you reach for over and over and over again. So you can see if the knife or the gun worked, you can end up having really bad habits, right? So we also want to talk about this in this whole thing. There's this way that you're filtering and interpreting their clippedness, their irritatedness, the short-temperedness, all of this. A way to think about this is the concept of energy. Now, I don't want to get woo-woo because I don't really see the world that way, but energy is real, and humans do exchange energy as we walk around. So let's talk about that. We all have an antenna that's seeking out people around us as we're walking around, trying to get people's energy, or vibes is another way to put this. You're getting the vibe off of people around you. We're doing that all the time, right? You are doing it. And at this point in your life, you're probably a bit of an expert in it. You're probably very good at interpreting other people's energy. A visual, if we were in class, we could do this. I would do this, is I'll be blowing bubbles and seeing where they all float and where they land and where they pop, and imagining that's where your energy landed. You don't really get to control it. It's just kind of out there floating around, and we're all doing it. Another way to look at this, and I don't have a good visual, I tried, but every visual I found was super weird, but it could be like smell. It's almost like we smell each other's emotions. But the picture, of course, would just be a lot of smelly people, so it didn't really work right. But we are all always picking up each other's emotions. And generally, when we first meet somebody, we are trying to find out how they feel. We're looking for what their emotional state is. Kind of a bit of a shakedown like this. We're patting them down, trying to see, how are you feeling right now? Especially if we have an important conversation to have with them. Or if it's somebody who in the past has had seepage and has let it out all over us, right? So then we go, ooh, how are you today? And we ask clever questions. And if it's somebody you know really, really well, you're probably pretty good at this. But those emotions can feel like they're coming at you just really, really fast, right? The other thing that's important is to think about with the concept of seepage is how other people see you, right? So when you have your emotions and they're seeping out, like anxious, irritated, tired, all of that, this is somebody whose emotions are not managed or acknowledged. When that happens, we make an impression on other people. And that impression, if those people have never met us before, is probably permanent. It's probably permanent either way. We'll have to, even if they've known us, we'll have to, because all communication is permanent, right? It's all permanent. So you can talk more, but if these are just people who are meeting you for the first time and then moving on, they could end up with a terrible impression of you. They could think of you as unpleasant, disinterested, detached, self-absorbed, who knows what. But a lot of that comes from this seepage, right? You're just having a bad day and you go through life because you have to. You can't just stay home. And throughout the day, your seepage is hitting your classmates, it's hitting your professors, it's hitting people at work, it's hitting your friends, it's hitting your family, whoever you're around. And depending on your relationship with those people, it can completely change how those people view you, which is important to think about, right? And all of this has to do with the power of habits, right? That's our last point I want to talk about today is habits. So habits can be both good and bad. Just on their own, habits aren't a bad thing. It's really how we work. Habits is the way human beings get stuff done. One of the ways we do. Because otherwise we'd have to literally think through every action we take. And that just wouldn't work. That just doesn't work at all. So let's talk about this. So the power of habit. First off, we create, maintain habits to conserve mental energy, right? So if we had to think through every single thing we do, it's exhausting. If you are somebody with attention deficit disorder, you don't really have the ability to go through your life on autopilot as well as somebody who's neurotypical. I have attention deficit disorder. That's why I know all about this. So for me, building habits is extremely important and really difficult. But like with ADHD, this is extra hard because my habits building is tough. The habits I have end up being wrong ones a lot, just like most people. But this conserving mental energy thing works really well if you can get the system going, right? Like if you don't have to think about brushing your teeth, washing your face, whatever your bed routine is, then if you just go, I'm ready for bed, I think I'm going to go to bed, and then you just go on autopilot and you take care of all that business and then you go to bed, that conserves an incredible amount of mental energy as opposed to somebody who has to sit and think through each thing. Oh, wait, I got to do this. Now I have to do this. And we don't, even somebody with ADHD doesn't think through all of those things because we have to have habits, right? So habits really help us. They help us a lot. They're a good thing. Let's see how they work in the brain. I'm not going to get too deep in this because I'm just regurgitating what I've learned, but the habits live in the basal ganglia. That's that part in the middle that's red right there. We have emotion, memory, pattern recognition. It all hangs out there. Prefrontal cortex is where we make decisions. So when you have a habit and you're trying to work on it, like in this class, we'll talk a lot about habits and stuff. Sometimes we take that habit from our basal ganglia to our frontal cortex and we think about it. And then we can actually change our habits. It's possible, but it does take work and it takes intentionality and it usually takes practice. So next point about the power of habits. By the way, this is from a book. There's the author right there. Habits can be good, bad, or neutral, but once established, they never really leave us. And that's weird, right? We are habitual creatures. You can alter habits, you can tweak them, but once they start, and that's where people are like, ooh, avoid bad habits. Like if you're learning to play a musical instrument, that's when teachers are like, in the very beginning especially, are really strict. Like, no, you need to have your fingers exactly like this, or you need to be doing I'm playing a guitar now. You need to be like, hold your fingers on the frets exactly like this. And it's super detailed because that habit's important. Same with martial arts. Let's jump all the way over there. But like when I did archery in Japan. I was an exchange student. Learning how to hold the bow for Kyudo is super complicated. I spent months and months and months just learning how to hold it exactly right and then how to pull the string back exactly right. But that's to build a habit. Because if that habit is built wrong, because I'm lazy in the beginning, it won't go away. I can alter it, but it's tough, as you know. You probably had bad habits yourself. Maybe you bite your nails and you wish you could stop. But it's so hard to do, right? This is why. And then number 3, creating habits is straightforward, but choosing which habits to create is not. So habits get made pretty easily, but we don't get to pick which ones very easily. So we have to be very intentional. Habits are made all the time as we just live. That's the way humans work, right? We are habitual little animals that are looking for shortcuts all the time. So this is how habits work. So let's talk about our facial expressions, because that's one thing that is habitual, is how your face shapes itself when you feel certain things. That's a habit. So you ever thought about that? So when you are upset, when you're worried, when you're happy, you tend to make the same faces. This is why people who know you, your partner, your friends, your family, know exactly how you feel just by looking at you. This is why. Because our facial expressions are habitual. You can intentionally try and have a different facial expression, like, okay, I'm not going to do that one. But that's work and it takes effort. And then you'll be trying to build a new habit, which is fine. But this is interesting to think about, right? That if our facial expressions are habitual, then the concept of a resting bitch face is real. And it's something that if you get told you have, well, think about it. What do your face and body say about you? What are you projecting into the world with your habitual body language? What are you saying? Think about that. It's a good one to think about, right? The loop, putting this into the loop, is you have your trigger, you have your nonverbal response, and your outcome is your face. It just shows it on your face. This happens, and then it goes back to a trigger, because then people react to how you look. And if they are people who know you well, they'll react the same way as they usually do. And then this whole thing can become an incredibly complicated habitual loop. Yeah. And that's how being a human is. So this is a good spot to take a moment, pause this, and write some stuff down because this is covered in your homework. So yeah, take a minute to do some reflection. The breakout, just to help you with it more. So you're going to do an activity. This is what we would do if this was in class, but you have a homework assignment that's similar, so make sure you read that. But in this activity, the speaker tells a person across from them about something they enjoy doing outside of school. That's it. They just want to talk about something they'd like to do outside of school, while the listener is looking for changes in the person's facial expression, right? Which words and phrases cause the biggest reaction in the person, in you, and which ones cause the biggest facial expression changes in them. You want to be looking for that. So you're going to be doing an exercise kind of like this. Hope you enjoy it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you think about it. But it's interesting. I think this is interesting. I have students point out my habits more often than I feel comfortable with, and I think it's helpful. It's very, very interesting, especially because I teach speech as well. And sometimes students will like mimic me for whatever, and I'll be like, I don't do that, and they'll be like, yeah, you do. And then if I watch a video, I'm like, oh my god, that's all I do. Am I creative at all, or am I just an animal who's trained to do tricks? I don't know. Anyway, enjoy this. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. All right. So just to wrap up this conversation about habits, so we form communication habits, right? So we're talking about facial expressions. Communications in particular situations can also become habitual, right? So like if public speaking. So if, for example, if when you give a speech, you turn red. I have a friend who does that. If that becomes a habit, it's going to happen every single time, which is whether or not you're nervous. It can have nothing to do with you're nervous. Maybe you have habitual habits when you're working with a client, or you have specific habits when you're having a negative exchange, right? Those can become habits. So maybe you go straight to being angry and aggressive whenever a certain topic is brought up. That can become a habit. And the last one is communications with particular people can become habitual, right? So like imagine you are talking to your parents about that topic that they always bring up. I'm not sure what it is for you and your parents, but for me and my parents, up until I came out as gay, it was, when are you going to get married and have kids? That conversation became really habitual with me throughout my 20s and 30s. I got really used to, I'd say comfortable with, not that I enjoyed it, but used to the same exact conversation happening every single time I would come home from college or from wherever I lived after college for about 10 years. That's just one example, right? Maybe you have friends or that you show up whenever you hang out, you always talk about the same things. I had a partner who would have the same group of friends that he'd had for a long time, and whenever they hung out, they reminisced about old times. And I realized after watching them hang out after a while, like this was habitual. That they would talk about the same topics. It was like a ritual in the beginning of hanging out, and then hanging out would become more natural. But in the beginning, it was very habitual how this particular group got along. Maybe you have that. Maybe you have a brother or a sister who you have a habit with. Some of these can end up being on autopilot, right? You can just go through an entire conversation, entire visit, right? Maybe you have this with grandparents, things like that. This can happen a lot too. So something for you to think about. All right. So I want to give you guys an example, a case study to think about how all this could work. And so my example is with a guy I'm just making up named Ryan. If I'm not sure if there's a Ryan in the class right now, I don't think there is. But if there is, this isn't about you. This is just a name I picked out of nowhere. So let's imagine, put you in this situation that Ryan sends you an email attacking your integrity, right? Ugh, integrity. For some of you, you're like, okay, whatever. But imagine if we go back to the beginning of this video and we're talking about values. Now imagine if one of my core values is integrity, right? Maybe I really want people to understand that I have integrity, and I hate when people challenge my integrity, and so I get really offended. This goes right to my emotions, right? It's I told you those four things. It goes right to it because it's my past trauma. So he gets right there. He doesn't know that. He's just sending an angry email, but it gets right to my trauma because he's talking about my integrity. We had this picture before. Remember the under pressure person, the overworked person with the filter, the seepage. So in this situation, there's Ryan, there's me, and I have this happen to me, and or you, if you want to put yourself in the same shoes, and let's say we reach to our toolkit for our reaction. And what's our reaction going to be? We pick silence. Let's say we pick silence. Even though this is a work email, right? Have you ever reacted unprofessionally at your job? If you haven't, it's pretty normal to experience that from time to time, especially when somebody triggers you. So Ryan's triggered us, and then we're like, ugh, and so we reach into our bag and we reach for silence. So another way to look at this loop, you can start this wherever you want, really, but I'm starting with right above my name there where it says trigger. Let me point at it. Whoop. My arm. This is hard to do intentionally. That way. So the trigger happens. He sends me his email. Arr, he's mad. I have my emotional response. Ugh. And I choose silence, which then triggers Ryan. Ryan's like, this professor hasn't written me back. What's going on here? And maybe Ryan has abandonment issues. Maybe Ryan has problems with people not communicating in the past, and that's a value of his. Maybe I'm triggering him, and I don't even know about it. So then he has his outcome, which is choosing that hammer, and then he's going to come at me again, which will, of course, trigger something in me. Oh, now I'm getting an email that's flat out attacking me in some other way. And you could see how this loop could continue until, well, it's already kind of exploded, but it's a terrible loop. It's a terrible, terrible loop. So that is one way to understand how this all happens. How does this work in your life, though, right? In my life, this is an example with some guy named Ryan and me and whatever, but this sort of thing is real, right? Your professors are people. You don't know what's going on in their lives, but maybe you send them an email that you're really upset and you don't know what's happening, and you might trigger them, right? This is this example, but let's apply it to your personal life. How does this system work with your partner? How does this system work with your parents? How does the system work with your best friends? I'm sure you can think of a time where things like this have happened, and I want you to be thinking about that, right? And be thinking about what would break this whole cycle. What would change this? What would keep it from continuing to go like this? Well, in this specific situation with Ryan, I needed to choose something other than silence, didn't I? I needed to write this guy back. I needed to reply to him. I needed to actually do my job. That would have kept him from being triggered. Or if Ryan didn't have that as a trigger, this could have ended there. But we all know that that if you've had a problem with your professor and you've been angry already, that them just not replying to you is not going to cure the situation. So I believe that this is mine, and for me, because I can only control myself. Here I am up there. That's my reaction. So Ryan also needs to fix it from his own side by not choosing the hammer. But this is how humans work. This is how conflict happens. Yeah. So despite our differences, the real question, this is the question of this entire course, is despite our differences, how can we foster mutual respect through our communications? We're different. We're all different, and we're all going to have problems. We don't even know what our triggers are for each other. We could sit and talk and try and figure them all out, but we won't be able to. There's too many, and we don't even know our own very well, right? We know some, but we don't know them all. So how do we do it? How do we get along? And that's what this class is really about. I want you to be reflecting on that right now, understanding that this is the situation. This is how conflict works. Being a human, we're kind of doomed, right? A little bit, but we're not. We can get along. It just takes intentionality, and it takes work, and it takes taking a class like this. I want to leave you with this quote from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, people forget uh, what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Yeah, yeah. I want to leave you with that. And I'm going to see you on the discussion board. So you have a good week.